And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk outside at Spartan Stadium. East Lansing, Michigan. Michigan State Spartans 1-0 after a victory over Central Michigan last Friday night. You probably get sick of hearing me talk about it, but I just loved the atmosphere Friday. The tailgating, the pregame, 75 degrees. Not many times you can have a 75-degree night game, so might as well have that early in the season. I've written about it. People are probably tired of hearing about it. I love it, Konyndyk. Do you think Paul Konyndyk, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just wondering, I was talking with Nils last night about this. You think they should play Central every year in that thing? I don't think Michigan State would want to, but there was an edge to that thing with Central here.
They should play in-state. They should play an in-state MAC school. That definitely. I mean, that's the whole point. That's why it's full. It's a Friday night. It's a holiday weekend in the state of Michigan, and it's designed to play an in-state MAC school. So if it's Eastern, Western, or Central, that's what it should be. But Central, even though there's very, very low enrollment now, there's a whole lot of fans. And same thing with Western when they play in that game. And
I think Central travels better than Western here. Would you agree?
I don't think so. I think that when they played either of those two schools, I'm not sure about Eastern because we haven't seen them in here for a while, but Central or Western, that's a good vibe, it allows people to come and enjoy the weekend. It allows them to enjoy the weekend beyond football, and that's a really nice thing about it. And the only downside for us is that we're working all night, and then you feel hungover the next day. But I guess that makes us feel like normal football fans.
It's competitive. That game was competitive too. Yeah. Michigan State won convincingly. Everybody knows that. But it was, the tailgating was good. And for instance, Central Michigan is not as good as East Carolina. Okay, East Carolina played Michigan. East Carolina played Michigan on a Saturday. I don't know. I was in Southeast Michigan or across the border during the weekend. I don't know. I being here and seeing it, there's no way that it was better there than what was going on here Friday night. And East Carolina is a better team than Central. They won 8 games, went to a bowl game last year, whatever. But the Central Michigan State game was a bigger happening Friday of the football weekend. I'm biased because I'm here, but it was outstanding anyway.
And I also think there's a history there. The three times that Central has beat Michigan State, or 4 times, whatever it was in program history. There's Central fans coming out here expecting perhaps an upset. You see the beat Michigan State again type of thing. So it adds to it a little angst. There's a little motivation. You got in-state guys on both sides, and sometimes guys from Michigan State know guys on the other team, vice versa. It's a good deal. I enjoyed it,
and it works better on a Friday than a Saturday.
Of course it does on that weekend, because the whole idea why Michigan State plays on Friday night, so people can go out and enjoy the tourism in the state of Michigan.
And it's a holiday weekend. I wrote this yesterday. I'm getting to where I enjoy that more than Lions Thanksgiving game, because that game usually doesn't mean anything by that point in the season. As a Lions fan, in all due respect, maybe this year it'll mean more, but that's always fun. I love the Lions Thanksgiving game. I love this thing on Friday night. Anyway, I've talked about that enough. Today over at the stadium at interviews, Harlan Barnett was there for the first time this season, or since the spring. He spoke to the media. Noah Kim came out and spoke. The new kicker, Jonathan Kim, came out and had some comments. Fitzpatrick was available for interviews, and Dylan Tatum. Dylan Tatum was great, with just very insightful about himself and the team and excitability. And Harlan Barnett says he loves that guy, how competitive he is. And Harlan Barnett likes his young defensive backs. And Dylan Tatum made a comment that, it's the class of 22 DBs. They're going to bring this thing back, meaning the tradition of the secondary. I assume he's talking about as a second-year player. I'm sure he's been informed about what's gone on here in the past with DBs. He's an important cog in that. He's playing corner right now. Long-term, he might not be a corner, but he showed against Central he was good at corner, and when the time comes, he can chest somebody up and hit pretty good too. Spencer as well. There's a lot of vibe with those young defensive backs, Paul, and I think for good reason.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe we didn't pay enough attention to last year, maybe like in the opener, because you think, guys are missing tackles and whatnot, and it's a first game. Without going back and rewatching that game, there were some missed tackles. There always is in the first game, but I was impressed with the linebacker cohesiveness and defensive backs in that, and them coming up and making plays and making hits, and not just the shoulder, try to get a guy to the ground. You saw guys actually making hits and wrapping up, and you saw more than one guy arriving at the ball. And that population to the ball concept that's always talked about and defensive coaches always talk about, we didn't see a whole lot of that last year, to be honest with you, frankly. And so it was good for Michigan State to see, even though Central Michigan was an overmatched team. I said to you just a minute ago, and I know you agree with me, that a lot of the plays that weren't big plays, in that Central Michigan game. Might have been last year with different personnel on the field. And, Michigan State didn't get tested with a deep ball. I understand that. But Michigan State last year didn't have to get tested with a deep ball to give up lots of yardage in the pass game. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of overlook. Everyone remembers the deep ball catches or a coverage bust that result in big plays. Just as big a problem, in my opinion, was the underneath stuff where linebackers weren't in position to make plays. They weren't there with defensive backs. Like the exploitable holes within a defensive coverage scheme were extra exploitable. It's like you're playing cover 2 or something like that. Okay, this should give up that, but it was giving up that in addition to other things because the things weren't tightened down enough. This year, I noticed for the first game, seeing guys play, cohesively. Linebackers, like every single play on a short pass over the middle or whatever, you saw linebackers dropping back. Whether it's Cal Halliday, Jordan Hall, even. It was a lot better operation. That doesn't mean there's not going to be breakdowns. It doesn't mean that Washington 2 weeks from now isn't gonna pile up 600 yards. They're going to do that against a lot of people. So don't get me wrong, but in terms of just the overall operation and what needs to happen for Michigan State to be a team that's competitive, and what I mean by competitive, I mean a bowl team, 7 or 8 wins, 6, 7 or 8 wins. For them to be consistently competitive and not get blown out, which is a huge deal with the clock the way it goes this year, but to stay in games and have a chance to win it in the fourth quarter, I saw a lot of what I needed to see against Central Michigan.
Man, the elements were there. That doesn't mean they'll be there every week, but it was a nice beginning. There were some clues there. To use old D'Antonio terms, they were connected and they played square. Now, playing a lot of cover 4 makes it easier to keep an eye on things, but they played it correctly and arrived correctly and did some variations out of that a little bit. But I like to see the quarters against a team that wasn't going to push it deep down the field to keep an eye on the quarterback. That was the right thing to do. They did it. It made sense. They tackled. They arrived. They were good. So good first step on Michigan State for a defense that's been suspect for a long time.
The other thing I liked about it is that was a window dressing team. Paul Petrino does a lot of nice things. I texted a buddy of mine. I said it kind of reminds me of the old Boise State, with the moving parts formationally, and in a first game that makes you really susceptible to getting out of position. I felt like as that game went on, the Michigan State got used to the window dressing. They made more and more plays, and they were correct a lot. They didn't fall for the wash. And I think that was a good thing. Consistently solid play from the linebackers. I can't say that enough because last year I think Michigan State had good linebackers. They had guys with potential that are there this year, like a guy like Brule, for instance. But Cal Halliday, Aaron Brule, Jacoby Windman, they play really well together. And that's another good sign for this defense.
They took on collisions at the right time. The corners took on collisions at the right time, leveraged it properly. And it was nice. Nice first step for Michigan State. All right, Richmond's coming to town this weekend. I don't know much about Richmond. They've been a playoff team in a lot of years for a 1AA team or whatever they call it these days. That is a place where you can put together a good 1AA team. We've seen James Madison over the years be pretty good. It's MAC-level football with fewer scholarships. It's good talent down there. Richmond's been a playoff team. They were favored by a lot against, Morgan State and lost. So people don't know what to make of that. I've not watched them yet. Talking to the people here today, it's the usual lip service stuff. We don't need to talk all day about Richmond. I'll look into it as the week goes along. But do you have any initial thoughts on this thing?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that people do when they put together preseason rankings, we see the same thing. Saw the same thing with Clemson last night. They're ranked highly because they're Clemson. Saw the same thing with some other teams. TCU, most notably. Yeah. You don't look at necessarily who people replace when a team is really, really good and they've got a historical reputation for talent. Richmond replaced 2 starting wide receivers, or 3 wide receivers. One of those guys is in the FBS. They replaced a starting running back and their quarterback and a lot of their offensive line. So that's a team that had quite a bit of transition. It's a team that I think wanted to run the football, didn't do that as well as they would have liked. It's a team that's got some talent on defense. When you look at it, the area where when I looked at them initially that I thought was decent is they've got 2 all-conference defensive ends. Okay. One is a returning first-teamer. One's a second-teamer. They've got a guy that was injured last year but had 8.5 sacks as a defensive tackle, 300-pound defensive tackle, 295. They had 8.5 sacks 2 years ago. So they've got some good things on the defensive line. They've got an NFL caliber linebacker and maybe one corner or safety returning. So really, when you look at them, there's some similarities, I think, between Central Michigan and Richmond, in that Central Michigan had probably a couple good DBs, but they've got some quality defensive linemen that are going to be, that's what I'm trying to get to. They got some quality defensive linemen that are going to be a test for Michigan State in terms of, the short yardage stuff that Michigan State needs to get better at. The run game operation. Can all 11 guys work together? Because if they don't, then you're going to have breakdowns, and then people are going to be talking about whether you should go out of the shotgun on a fourth down play.
Did Urban Meyer ever go under center for short yardage ever?
No. So that's a classic example of, if it doesn't work, it's got to be effed up. And
I like under center, but to say that it's just holistically, factually, schematically wrong is ask Urban Meyer. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, the whole idea is like you got a lot of different options.
I prefer under center situations. But if you run quarterback sneaks, you are leaving your quarterback open and getting hit. We saw Drew Stanton bust his helmet once on his last play ever played here on a quarterback sneak.
We saw last year Peyton Thorne get hurt in the Western Michigan game. It wasn't on a sneak per se, but Noah Kim is not the biggest of quarterbacks. So if you go,
the other thing is Michigan State center really struggled last weekend.
Right,
Fincher. Now, I'm not going to say really struggled, but if it's fourth and short, I don't know if I'm sneaking again over that guy.
Right. I mean, that's Fincher's essentially his first game of like a career backup reserve type player, undersized backup type reserve type player. You've got a CMU team whose strength, in my opinion, is defensive line.
Strength versus weakness there a little bit.
And I thought Fincher, as the game went on, got better. Samac did come in.
Which was curious. Samac sits out because of injury, and he goes in with 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. That was curious.
Well, I think they wanted to get him ready and wanted to get him plenty of reps for the rest of the way.
Why?
Because they need him.
Yes, but they
need Nick Samac, or at least that's what.
So why did he sit out the first half, or most of it?
Why did he sit out the first half? Because they were hoping they wouldn't have to use him.
So why'd they use him?
Because they needed him.
They were up 28. I don't know.
But he came in earlier than the fourth
for a little bit, and then he was in. I didn't understand.
He came in at the end of the. He came in before halftime.
Curious.
Well, obviously, I mean, it's like one of those things. Yeah, they needed him. I mean, we were just talking about how
he's got a ton of experience. I mean, maybe knock some rust off.
He does have a ton of experience, but I feel like
anyway,
they need to get that thing going. They need to get the run thing. They need to get the whole run game operation oiled up. For when Washington comes in here, and they can't be working out kinks or rust and that type of thing. I do think Fincher played better in the second half than he played in the first, but it bothers the whole. If it doesn't work, it's the fault of the coach. That kind of bugs me. You saw you look at how well that Jalen Berger 12-yard run was blocked up. Now, if a guy misses a block, or Jalen Berger hits the wrong hole, then you've got a bunch of angry fans screaming, "Hey, see that stupid run play? It was terrible." If it's blocked up right, it works. And then the other thing is, you can't. People are always like, "Well, let's get more creative." You can't get creative. There's no amount of the whole creativity thing is bullcrap in my opinion. You need a yard, you get a yard.
Especially against Central. I mean, that's right. So you work on it, and if it fails, you got something to work on. I understand the game was close when that went on, but
I watched a lot of football games this weekend, and I think the short yardage operation is one thing where if you've got a veteran, if you've got a good defensive concept and you've got a good defensive structure, short yardage sometimes struggles. I was watching that Toledo Illinois game. There's like 2 or 3 times in that game where Illinois, which is a big physical power running football team, where they couldn't pick up third or fourth and short, and that's not so that's. I know that it's frustrating for Michigan State fans because it's been an issue here in the past, even going back to the Ken Walker days. But Michigan State needs to be able to run that,
yes.
And you got to be able to practice it. To be able to do it against good teams, you got to be able to do it against Central. I think they'll get better for it. I think it's a good reminder for your tailbacks that you got to find a way to get it done. And I think Jaron Mangum, presumably he'll be back in the lineup. You talk about Samac, he warmed up pregame. Jaron Mangum also warmed up pregame and looked okay. They didn't need Jaron Mangum in that game, but it would be nice to see him, get some reps and see if that adds another layer to the onion with the short yardage game. We talked about tight end blocking a lot in training camp. I thought there were some decent moments for Michigan State, and there were some not so decent moments. So
I agree.
That's what I guess that's what I'm going to be looking for in terms of improvement from one week to the next. I want to see where Michigan State can go run game operation-wise to see if they can add to this thing.
Yeah, and J.D. Duplain's a good player, but he didn't have his best game. That guy Bristol, number 10. Bristol's interesting because he's they say he's 6'1". I don't know if he's 6'1", but he's 300 plus or whatever. But he's a different shaped 300 plus, and he's got those big arms. He's a big fire hydrant guy, and he's quick. And he outplayed Duplain on some of those fourth down plays. He got into him and then did a swim, or they got into him, then did a rip. He got into him and then like a 2 gap and then went 1 gap on him. And Duplain struggled with that on the fourth down stoppage. That was one of the things. On another fourth down stoppage, Brandon Baldwin, who looked a little bit better, I thought. He's always been pretty good with his lateral movement and pass protection. I thought he's even better at that. But on a fourth down stoppage, he let a guy cross him into the B gap and was involved in the stoppage on one of those fourth down plays. So you can be pretty good, have a good game, but on fourth down if you screw up. And also on the one play, the 3rd and 4, the game-changing play when he went deep to Glover that changed the whole game around, he had no time to throw on that, and he had to get rid of it because Brandon Baldwin, the ball was snapped and he was the last to know. So defensive end crossed his face and was on the quarterback right now. Interesting that Kim saw that as the matchup, that I'm going to Glover on this, 3rd and 4, because he just missed somebody, and I think maybe 1 play earlier, 2 plays earlier, Malik Carr in the cover 2 hole didn't quite get there, and Kim looked like he was a little frustrated by that. But he had to make a decision right now, went to Glover. It's interesting that Kim trusted all those receivers in different situations. That was a key point in the game. It had been a frustrating game to that point. He's going to Glover, second-year player, but basically a redshirt freshman. I don't know if he ended up playing more than – I think he played 1 game last year, right? So he's a redshirt freshman. He's not a sophomore, second-year player. But went to him in that key situation, tight coverage, perfect ball, and trusting that guy would make the play. Like Kim said today, I knew he could make that play. He makes it every day in practice. The trust he has on these unproven players is an interesting part of this team. But those blockers, they got it's good to get exposed a little bit so you get back in the film room and wrap them on the knuckles a little bit about it, Paul. But Kim, what do you think about all that crap I just said?
I just think Noah Kim is we even knew this last year. He's really quick with his brain. I think that's one thing you need to be really good at to be a good quarterback, or at least to win a starting job. But he's also goes where his reads take him, and he's not It's one thing to say that you trust all your receivers. It's another thing to demonstrate that trust. And to me, he has demonstrated that trust. He did that, going to Fitzpatrick. I think there's 8 different receivers caught balls. I wrote about this yesterday. 5 different guys got 4 targets or three targets or more. There's the most targets anybody got was 6, and that Malik Carr had the most targets. Him and Trey Mosley. Malik Carr with 1 catch on 6 targets. He had the spectacular touchdown catch, but
some were inaccurate. Some routes might have shut down too early.
Somewhere, I agree with you, but on a couple of those, I think the communication thing wasn't necessarily there. And
one of his best catches was out of bounds because it got thrown out of bounds a little too far, not on Malik, but ironically he made that catch.
But the one he had that he caught twice and fumbled out of bounds, that was bad. Listen, you expect for a guy that's talked about all the time as being like an elite ball skills,
talent,
receiving talent, an elite receiving talent. Okay, you've got to make a lot of plays, and he made 1 really good play at the end of the game, right? So, and that was a nice throw, and that was nice, and everything about it. But you got to make the routine, and you've got to run the right route. That's part of he wants to be a leader in that room. That's you're doing everything you can to the best of your ability. I'm not saying that he was a bad teammate in that game, but he didn't have his best game, and I think he's one of the things that he needs to do is he needs to get in shape a little bit too. I think he came into the season a little bit. He looked tired a few times out there, in my opinion.
I heard he was limping with a hip situation or something.
I think he's playing too heavy, man. I mean,
he looks
Ted Gilmore. Ted Gilmore said he wants him at 265. He's playing at 282.
He's 282.
Yeah. So that tells me all I need to know right there. That's a lot. 15 pounds. My math isn't good. I'm not going to do the math, but that's. Maybe it doesn't show up.
What does he want him at? 265?
265. That's plenty big.
17 pounds.
But all in all, I think there's a lot of good things that Michigan State can build on. Going back to the whole Noah Cam, I like the fact that he spreads the ball around. Now, at some point, there's going to have to be a time where you're going to have to like trust your guys, and you're going to have to throw into double coverage and whatnot. And but the fact that he has multiple guys that he can trust right now is huge. I said it in the VCast after the game, and I really firmly believe that the more guys you get involved in a game like this, the more likely it is for those guys to be involved the rest of the way.
And that's different than last year. Peyton Thorne, I liked him in a lot of ways, but he would tunnel vision.
There's a lot of pressure on Peyton Thorne last year. We can talk about what he did wrong, but there's a lot of pressure on him to get a ton of balls to Keon Coleman and to Jaden Reed. All right, those guys were the horses, and if they were, I'm not saying I understand Jaden Reed, but those guys were the guys that dominated target share last year, and those are the guys he trusted besides Trey Mosley. I think he trusted Trey Mosley as well, but he was always getting Trey Mosley not on the primary read. It was always on a lot of times the secondary read. But I don't think that Noah Kim has that luxury, but I also don't think he's wired like that. I think he's wired to run an offense, to go where his reads take him, and I think he did that last year. In those games that he came in, he went where his reads took him, and he did it fast, and he did it efficiently, and that's a good look right now. And
we didn't see Antonio Gates or Foster much. They were on there and making plays, and Antonio Gates had that great block on that touchdown, the 12-yard touchdown run. He drove that corner way off the screen, and on that same play, the tight ends blocked well too, which was a plus. Evan Morris had a nice block on that one.
Gates did draw the PI flag. On one of those grabs, or on one of those scoring drives, so that was big. Besides the blocking, and then Montorie Foster, he did have one catch, but he had 3 targets, and he wasn't open very much. And I think Central did a pretty nice job for the most part on Mosley and Montorie Foster, and it's nice that Michigan State was able to come in and get those other guys.
The last couple of years, Michigan State has not gone that deep into the wide receiver bench. They'll play their 3 starting wide receivers, a 4th a little bit, like Jeremy Bernard didn't get, and then the 4.5 receivers. They're showing they're going to play 5 or 6, which is interesting. And Fitzpatrick was talking about that today, saying, "Hey, we know we can run our routes hard, and if it's time to come out, tap your helmet, you're coming out." If they all think that way and they're willing to come out, that's healthy. Fitzpatrick said he had just played. Before his out and up for 72 yards, he had just played on the punt return team, and he was a little bit gassed. You're out there, and then he saw the play come in out and up, and he knew he was was a primary on that. He was like, okay, but that's a big guy that might not have the snap-back endurance of a little guy or something like that. But I thought he had a good team attitude about it, like, hey, I'm going to run my routes hard, which you need to have if you think, and like he said, and we talked about in the past, if you think that there's only a 10% chance you're going to get the ball on this particular route combination, especially against the coverage that's coming out that particular play, some guys might just kind of dog it to conserve for later, wanting to stay on the field. He's like, no, you run it hard. And if they have that kind of ethic across the board where everybody's running it hard and coming out and going in and all those guys, they've got good talent and they can all do it, that makes the whole unit better, especially with the quarterback who will spread it around. I think it's a healthy situation right now with those guys. The
one guy we haven't seen yet because of him getting hurt in the first play is Alante Brown. There's another guy that they like.
Good point.
And so that's one more guy. I do think that one of the things I really admire about Courtney Hawkins is that I think he knows that the pulse of this room. He knows that he's got a bunch of competitors out there, and he also knows that these guys understand the goals that have been set. He's been saying no block, no rock. We hear that all the time. These guys believe it. You see it out there you mentioned Gates. Other guys are out there making blocks, but they know that there's other guys that are just as talented as them. So they've got to be, at their best. And route running to one's full potential. When I watch a high school football game, that's one thing that really, really bothers me. Every time I watch a high school football game, when I go to watch my son do marching band, I'm sitting there watching football. The thing that bothers me more than anything is a receiver that it doesn't run the route as well as he can because the play is not going to his side of the field. It drives me crazy. So to see guys doing what they're supposed to, you end up being rewarded for your hard work.
And fatigue could be a part of that thing. But it's like, when Baylor had when Art Briles was there and when they invented the RPO stuff and they would go deep, they would have they'd have a wide receiver out there and they would run an RPO and they would go deep against the corner, make him run. Second one RPO, they'd make him go deep again. Then they'd check another receiver and that corner is gassed. Now they're actually going deep. So sometimes a wide receiver might be conserving, but if you know someone's coming off the bench to help you out and you've got a team attitude about it, it can be a weapon. That's one of the things Baylor did well back then. The other thing on that out and up, and also as an out and up to Glover down the right sideline on a second 32-yarder, both of those were to the far side of the field. I don't know if you can call an out and up deep from the left hash to the right sideline with Peyton Thorne. I was a big proponent of Peyton Thorne, but these, when you talk about being able to make all the throws and how the playbook expands, I think those are examples of it, and I think that excites the receivers too. Now, what else we got going on? Oh, you mentioned Alante Brown. I got to mention, I heard that in radio down in Southeast Michigan, Ann Arbor, they're making a big deal about Alante Brown coming into that game, and I was curious about it myself after the game happened. I heard from a very good source that it was a stinger. Now, I'm not a physician, but it looks like the guy's out cold. He wasn't. It was a stinger, and I'm not here to say what a stinger is all about. But usually when a stinger happens, it's like nearer the ground, and you don't see a guy go down like that. So that freaks some people out. But he wasn't out cold. It was a stinger, so they did their evaluation, put it back in. But there's a lot of people, Paul, freaking out about it. People that are eager to rip on Mel Tucker and Michigan State that are pouncing on that. They don't have all the facts. So there's the facts for you. Go ahead.
The bottom line for me is that you've got a neurologist that clears those players.
Yes.
There's a standard, and there's a reason for that standard. At the same time, it's a bad look if the guy comes back in the game, returns a kick, and then is in street clothes after that.
You're right.
Okay, so it's an optics thing more than anything. So, everyone's looking for like the gotcha story, and I understand that, but optically it looks bad. But there's nothing. It's not like Mel Tucker needs him in the game. It's not like he's saying come back in the game. It's not like times where we've seen a guy come back in the game with a concussion. A neurologist clears the guy to play. So,
and quite frankly, sometimes coaches don't know who's on the field. Remember when we were at the Champs Sports Bowl in Orlando a long time ago, D'Antonio, and they ran like a deep pass, and it was to Blair White. This is before anyone knew who Blair White was. And I think Treadwell and D'Antonio, they called the play.
Devin Thomas called him, took himself out of the game on that.
Yeah, they thought Devin Thomas was on the field, so they call a play for Devin Thomas, and the play runs and it unfolds, and they're like, what the hell's Blair White doing out there? Now, Blair White ended up becoming a very good player, but at that time he hadn't played at all. But sometimes the coaches are doing, macro. All right, we got kick return out there, and it might have been, what the hell's Alante doing out there? Well, he got cleared. I don't care. Take his helmet.
That's probably
it might have been something as simple as that.
The other thing is, you look at Michigan State is still not. They have not properly or effectively explained what happened in a way that's in a way that could be like satisfying to the common
But you got the
human being.
HIPAA stuff though, and all you're not. What's the other thing? You're not supposed to comment on student athletes' health situations.
I don't
legally.
Care. I'm just saying optically.
Like a player can talk about his own health, but coaches are not allowed to. Paul, it's legally they are not allowed to.
Yeah, but you can have a better answer than what's been given. It's been convoluted, and I'm just saying there's between the optics and then the answers afterwards. It's bad luck for Michigan State. I don't think there's anything to it, and honestly, Alante Brown I want to talk about is the guy that I think can make plays. So I'd like to see what he can do out there, but
Yeah, I wonder where he would have fit in the rotation, because that's pretty deep in talent now.
Here's the thing that I've been wondering about. We've talked about Trey Mosley and stuff like that. He's played a lot of slot receiver, right? So if Alante Brown was out there at slot receiver, he's built for the slot. I think Alante Brown's a guy and he can play multiple receiver positions, but I think his body type, I think that's a guy. So I want to know, does he come in and does he spell Trey Mosley, or is that a deal where Trey Mosley plays another, an outside receiver position and then Alante Brown is in the slot? I don't know how that whole mix and match thing will work, but I do think having a little bit of an explosive player in the slot would be a good thing for Michigan State. Trey Mosley, he had the costly drop. He had a fairly good game. He's not going to drop passes like that again, and he was really good about it afterwards. I was pleasantly surprised with Michigan State's receiving core, just because a lot of times when you break guys in,
we knew they had talent,
right.
But
a lot of times when you break guys in, it takes several games, even half a season, for that talent to show up, to move from the practice field to the playing surface. And I mentioned this after the VCast the other night, but like you think of Benny Fowler, Tony Lippett, Keith Mumphrey, those guys, they all ended up being NFL guys. It took a long time for those guys to look like NFL guys. In fact, with a Fowler, basically the Rose Bowl at the very end of the season. That's when those guys came on. So to see guys doing it early on, that's a big thing for Michigan State's offense, provided they can continue to add to that. But the earlier you do it, the better it is for in terms of consistent productivity from start to finish for the season.
That's good, especially with that quarterback. Got to get the tight ends consistent. We've been saying that all year. Pass pro's got to be on. Pass pro was pretty good. I think Spencer Brown's got a little bit better with his lateral movement too. So those are good things for sure. You got to get SpartanMag in there at some point. And I'm wondering if they can't go with SpartanMag again this weekend. I'm wondering if they go to what they worked on in early August, which is Duplain at center and Wigginton at left guard. I wonder if that would. I mean, they know the players better than we do, and that's what they went with Fincher. But I'm just wondering if they might rejumble that and take another look at something else.
To do that, I really think that you've got to do that in practice all week long.
Yeah.
You know, with a fresh quarterback. So if they're going to do it, then they go with. I'm not even necessarily Wigginton. Vandermark is another guy. You know, I mean
at left guard. Though I'm talking about.
Oh, I'm talking about like if you're going to do center, like if SpartanMag wasn't ready to go or whatever.
Well, I think Wigginton is further along than Christian Phillips is at right guard. Christian Phillips is coming along and he's got a good future, but I think Wigginton is a step closer. So you're losing one thing to add another. So you have Fincher in there. But you have Duplain at left guard, okay. But are you better off with Duplain there and then Wigginton? And basically, who's better, Fincher at center or Wigginton at left guard?
Right, and that's the thing. But I think in terms of like if you're changing out centers, the bottom line is for a quarterback like a Noah Kim, you want to practice with that guy all week long. Especially when it's hot out and whatnot.
And we don't know. They won't tell us what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. But being a routine guy like Mel Tucker is, routines, you'd want to get a lot of work if you're going to change center with your quarterback. And
communication and knowing what to do. On that fourth down stop, when Brandon Baldwin allowed the guy to penetrate the B gap, on the other side, 45, the outside linebacker came in. Michigan State had 3 receivers on the field to get them to go into nickel, and then brought them all in for a tight package. I think in the future, maybe Christian Fitzpatrick, a bigger receiver, becomes part of that. If you want to go 3 receivers in short yardage, make them go nickel, then come in and condense, have your bigger receiver on the field. That could happen. In this situation on the right side, it was Mosley and Glover, and they're both on the right side, and they were pointing at pre-snap, and they both went to the same guy. I'm guessing that's not Mosley's error, right? So they both end up on one guy. Another guy comes free. He ends up on the tackle too, assisting on the tackle along with the guy. So you're missing blocks. You're missing a communication there. So get it on film, wrap some knuckles, get that straightened out. You got to back up center there a little bit. So there's no reason to think that the short yardage situation is doomed to failure from now on. Central, probably the best thing they do as a team is defensive tackles inside. So that was, in that regard, that was a great sparring partner for Michigan State to go against a team that is equipped in there, that if you have a little bit of a slippage and shortcoming, they will expose it, and Central did, so that's good.
And the other thing Central wants to do is offense all the time is run the football. They want to be a physical running team, and when you have a physical running team and they're going up against those guys all the time in training camp, when you have a physical running team, your defense tends to be physical against the run. It's always been that way. It'll always be that way. And so I think in terms of MAC level opponent, this wasn't Akron last year. That's what I guess bottom line for me. People will be like, well, Michigan State outscored Akron this much, and they didn't outscore Central this much. Different teams. Akron was a mess. Central's got a good foundation to build around. I think their running game was solid. And one thing I will say about Manuel Jr., going back and watching that game, he's a lot more slippery than I thought. For a guy that size. And the other thing about that is I think that makes it more impressive to me about how the linebackers played, because a guy with that kind of size and those kind of wheels, they can make a linebacker look really bad really fast, especially when you got a bunch of linebackers that are all 240 plus.
Michigan State didn't make any mistake to allow him to get out, which is an improvement over last year, like the Indiana game when they let some run plays get out against a guy that couldn't throw. Right. So steps in the right direction there for Michigan State. All right, good first week for Michigan State. Interesting to watch as an observer. It flashed some talent there that wasn't we heard about it, but it was nice to see that show itself. So we got coverage leading into this week number 2 against Richmond as Michigan State has Washington coming in a couple weeks. We'll get into that later, but for that's it for now. Anything else, Paul? For Paul Konyndyk, my name's Jim Comparoni. I've been watching the VCast from East Lansing with the Spartans, SpartanMag.com.